Over the first 4 years of VR's lifetime, there have been many different solutions to how to get a melee combat to work in VR, with results that vary in quality. It's not like we lack a list of flat screen games we want to emulate. People want that awesome fast-paced sword fighter, that action RPG, or that sandbox where you can utilize everything as a weapon. We've gotten a couple popular answers to those ideas that have arguably surpassed the original non-VR games that have inspired them, but we lack definitive answers for other niches in melee combat. Until You Fall has a unique melee combat system that is well suited for games that want to create a fast-paced combat system that has depth as you get better at it. While it has a couple flaws that keep it from being widely played in the VR community, I believe it should be looked at for games that want to feel similar to a reflex-demanding character action game. This is Jack from Virtualist. The core that makes Until You Fall's guard break combat system work is the interplay between two sets of systems. First, a block and riposte system to break apart the enemy's guard, then playing with the combo and aggro systems to finish them off. How these systems play out when you're learning the game is that enemies attack you slowly, you block their attacks to break their guard, then slash at orange lines to finish off the enemy. Think of these early levels like the lower difficulties in a game like Beat Saber. The game at this point is teaching you the basic, clear language of its combat system so it can throw more at you and make you take on more enemies with more varied attacks later all at once. In the guard phase, there's a number of things you can do to speed up breaking the enemy's guard. Normally when you attack an enemy that's not attacking you, they'll block your attack. But you can chip away at their guard meter by mixing in attacks against the enemy when they're attempting to attack you. You can easily practice this against easier enemies, the absolute basic enemies that are begging you to smash them in order to speed up earlier areas. Against harder enemies, this creates a dilemma. You can't exclusively block their more complex attack patterns, or somehow weave in attacks in between them to minimize the time it takes to break their guard. You can actively create these windows of time when you can hit the enemy by either dashing into them or using a super, which is a special ability tied to the weapon you picked. Once the guard is broken, you have a limited window of time to do a combo to finish them off. How long this window is determined by the combo timer and how many enemies are around you. Depending on the difficulty, enemies will either give you a few seconds to kill the enemy you have stunned, or if you are in a real difficulty, immediately try to deck you in the face for hurting their friend. As a result, in tougher encounters, you need to both learn how to perform a combo as fast as possible and effect in positioning in such a way to give you the biggest window to kill the target. You can use your supers to either lock certain enemies in place or blow them away to make things easier for you. Combine these systems together and Legendary becomes a dance of trying to create openings in your enemy's formation that you can exploit to quickly dispatch units by breaking their guard in just the right moment where their buddies aren't in a position to help them. Without the clear visual language of the UI, which may seem simplistic at first, I doubt this combat could maintain its speed without overwhelming the player. Let's quickly go over what's happening in this clip to break down how I'm clearing a legendary room in the final zone so efficiently. In this clip, I see 2 empowered Spellweavers and 1 empowered Shield Guardian. I immediately dash forward and use my Explosion Super in order to separate one of the Spellweavers from the rest of the enemies. I quickly dispatch her and try to move on to her friend. But the empowered Shield Knight is right in front of me. I quickly use my Shard Storm and my combos to try to break through his guard. Once he's stunned and I got my explosion back, I use it again to separate him from the Spellweaver again. I jump on the Spellweaver and then turn back to my target and finish him off.
Well done.
Most players new to the game will let enemies surround them too easily. Early on you can get away with it, but later areas will punish you for it. Take a look here. I've deliberately let myself get surrounded in the starting zone, and I'm struggling to survive. And I'm exhausting myself. Not that I blame newer players for making this mistake. This is about as good a time as any to talk about the problems the game has. There's a pretty good reason that the game hasn't joined the cool VR games club in the eyes of the community. Its early game is sort of weak. The tutorial isn't bad at conveying the absolute basics, but it does leave the player with the impression that this will be a game Simon says the entire time. It takes more than 2 hours to get a handle on the basics of combat, and that's well within the refund window on Steam. It takes a bit too long for combat to leave the tutorial phase and start to become interesting. The fact that most other YouTubers I can find only make it to the second area at best doesn't help with this impression. There's also an issue I was made aware of after posting a clip of me playing this on Reddit. Most people have trouble figuring out how to dodge. For the record, you lean slightly and wait for the arrow to turn green. If you move back too early, you get smacked. It basically follows the same rules as blocking, but the UI doesn't convey that quite as well right now. Enemy variety is lacking, especially in the early game, and there's really not a lot of enemies that explicitly reinforce the gameplay concepts I went over. The best is the Spellweavers, and even though they're one of the most annoying enemies, they do a good job of teaching you to take advantage of openings. Even on lower difficulties, they'll stand behind tougher enemies and toss out projectiles when you try to break their guard. So they encourage you to use supers and other means to kill them before they have the chance to jump away. Any other new enemies you meet after these are beefed up versions of the first enemies you fought, which taught you how to block more attacks and dodge heavy blows. One quick thing I want to make note of is that can be positive or negative depending on your perspective, is this game is a bit of a workout to play. While for me personally this was great because I was able to play this game in the time I usually reserve for starting out my daily workout, I can see the fitness level demanded by this game being a barrier for some players. Even if you're able-bodied enough to move your arms in a manner the game demands, your personal fitness level will affect your ability to play the game. One day I let my fitness routine slip for a month or so, and I came back to this game and I played much worse than before. Guess there's another reason to stay in shape. Until You Fall feels like an early predecessor to a much better sequel, even though you can already see the brilliance of the combat system already. Boneworks and Blade & Sorcery's basic melee and physics system did a good job of helping lay the foundation for other sandbox games, and it's well suited towards games with a slow pace or an open space to experiment. However, the combat system here is better suited towards something more fast-paced. If we're gonna have a VR MMO or even just a simple co-op RPG, people are gonna want something that has a similar feel to the other flat screen games we've played in the genre. I can see why Boneworks' system took off and Until You Fall didn't. One clip of someone dropping a brick on a zombie or smashing melons on their heads and you immediately understand what the appeal of it is. Until You Fall by comparison takes time. It took hours before I got good enough at the game to make clips that look like this. I hope someone can take the ideas here and expand upon them. The Walking Dead is arguably the best iteration of the weighted combat system, and makes some sequences in Boneworks look dated by comparison. As much as I love Until You Fall, and I do love it, I can't help but feel that it's not the perfect iteration of this combat system, and that another VR game that builds upon its ideas could break into that prestigious club of VR games everyone has to play. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far, consider subscribing and checking out some of my other videos. I appreciate any comments I received, as any feedback I received is pretty helpful, especially in these early days when I'm still trying to tighten the screws around this format a little bit. I always have about 5 different ideas sitting in the back of my head for the next video, so we'll see which one wins out in the end for next time, and if I can get it done under a month,